Hey, welcome back. In this video, we're going to learn about something called Bootstrap. Now, before we even answer the question of what in the world Bootstrap is, I just want to say that it's an amazing tool that everyone should have in their toolbox. Having said that, a lot of people have a lot of very different and very strong opinions about Bootstrap and when you should or shouldn't use it and sort of how it fits into the bigger picture of your career path. So with that in mind, we're going to do two things in this video. First, we're going to look at what Bootstrap is and how you can start using it. And that first part of the video will be unbiased or hopefully objective. And then in the second half of the video, my cat is screaming at me. Anyways, in the second half of the video, I'll share my own personal biased opinion on when you should or shouldn't use Bootstrap and what your next steps should be, right? Sort of how Bootstrap fits into your overall career path. Okay, but without further ado, let's get started. And part one is just figuring out what Bootstrap is. So let's jump into the action. So let's begin with the question, what is Bootstrap? Well, as we can see from the official website, which is just getbootstrap.com, well, right away we see that Bootstrap is a tool that can help us build fast, responsive sites. But what does that really mean? How does it help us and what does it do? Well, throughout this series, when we've been writing our HTML, we've been giving our elements classes. Right? You make up a class name and then in your CSS, you can select or target that element and style it however you want. So what is Bootstrap? Well, imagine if there were these pre-existing agreed upon class names and Bootstrap has already written all of the CSS for those class names and now we just get to leverage them and recycle them and use them in our HTML without doing any of the difficult CSS coding. Well, that's exactly what Bootstrap is. And if that didn't make sense, that's okay, because the easiest way to understand this is to just jump in and try it yourself. So here's what I want you to do. Open up your text editor, so perhaps Visual Studio Code, and I just want you to create a brand new empty HTML file. You can create it anywhere as long as you know how to find it again. In my case, I have this folder on my desktop named Testing Bootstrap. I've opened that folder with VS Code, so I'm just going to say new file. Let's call it index.html. Inside the new empty file, remember that you can get a skeleton of a web page by just typing doc or doc and then hit tab on your keyboard. Okay, now for the body content, let's just have a heading level one that says welcome to our page. Let's go ahead and save this file and then I want you to open this, so find the file and then open it in your web browser. So I'm just going to drag this on top of Chrome. Cool. So at this point, we haven't done anything with Bootstrap. Now let me show you how to actually get started with Bootstrap. So from the official website, actually, this is a weird time to record a Bootstrap lesson because you can see it's currently on version 4.5. Now there's nothing wrong with version 4.5, but version 5 is going to come out soon and it's going to be a huge improvement. So if you're watching this video in the future, the Bootstrap website might currently be on version 5, and if that's the case, then you can just scroll down. You're looking for this area called Bootstrap CDN, and you're just going to want to grab this CSS code. So just select this code. We don't need any of this, just the CSS only for now. You would just copy this, be sure to select to the end of this line, and then copy it into your clipboard. Okay, but if you're not watching this in the future, if you're watching this very shortly after the upload date of the video, then in order for us to use version 5, we need to go up into the address bar, and for the domain, just right before the G in Git, let's say v5.getbootstrap.com. As of the time I'm recording this, version 5 has not been released yet, so it's still in the alpha or testing version, but that's okay. I've used it a couple of times and it seems great. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to scroll down, look for the Bootstrap CDN area. Here's that CSS only code. So this time there's actually a little copy button I can click. That copies it into my clipboard. And now back on our website, in our HTML, towards the end of the head section, maybe right below our title, just paste it in right here. Okay, now we can test to make sure it's working if we save our file and then when we're viewing it in the browser, if you reload, notice how the font changed. So that means that we are successfully loading the pre-written or pre-existing Bootstrap CSS code. Now, just seeing the font change isn't very exciting, so check this out. Do this with me. Maybe below our heading level 1, imagine we want to link to a different page, right? So we could say A and then tab. For the href value, just give it a placeholder hashtag, but then for the actual text that you would click on here, let's say about us. Let's give that a save and then refresh in the browser. Now, this just looks like a regular HTML link, right? It's blue and it's underlined. However, this is where we finally really use Bootstrap. On the opening tag, we can give it a class equals quotes, and I want you to say this exact name. It needs to be exact. BTN for button, and then a space, and then BTN dash primary. Okay, I did not make these names up. You need to use these exact Bootstrap names. Let's give that a save though, and now if we refresh, check it out. So it has rounded corners, it has padding. If you hover over it, it uses a slightly darker version of that same blue color. And you and I didn't have to write a single line of CSS code. We're just leveraging existing classes that Bootstrap already wrote for us. Now, if we change btn-primary to button or btn-success and save that, notice now it's green instead of blue. So there are different keywords in Bootstrap that correspond with different colors. Okay, what if we wanted the button to be a bit larger? Well, we could just give it a third class. So instead of just btn and then btn-success, we can say space btn-LG for large. Give it a save. Cool. Or if we wanted it to be a smaller than normal button, we could say btn-SM for small. Okay, and then if we wanted the button to just be an outline instead of a solid background color, you can change btn-success, right? So this is the one that controls the color. You can say btn-outline-success. So now it's green text with a green outline. Right? And since that one changes color just to prove a point, if you change it to btn outline dash primary, it'll go back to blue. Now, if you're wondering how in the world I knew all of these magical class names, well, you just go to the Bootstrap website and click on the documentation or docs link. In this left-hand sidebar, if we click on components, well, we see buttons is one of the options. And if you click on buttons, this page has all the information you need to create the different colors. So there are the buttons, and then here is the example HTML that would create these. If we scroll down, there are the outline versions of the buttons, and then here is the documentation on the different sizes, right? Large and small. Now, I don't want to get too sidetracked on buttons. Bootstrap is not a library just for buttons. That's just the first example that I started with. So let's change gears. Let's see what else Bootstrap can do for us. So notice how our content is hugging the very left edge of the browser window. And usually that's not what we want, right? A lot of the times we want to sort of center our content in the middle horizontal portion of the screen. So check this out. In our HTML, let me select the heading level 1 and link into my clipboard and cut them, or copy them and delete that so we have a clean slate. I'm going to paste them back in just a moment, but I want to wrap them inside a div. So say div.container, hit tab. Now, container is a name that you've seen me use in earlier lessons, but also Bootstrap uses this name. It's a very common name in the world of HTML and CSS, but if we just paste the heading level 1 and A element to live inside this container, if we give that a save, notice that automatically centers the content sort of in this horizontal area. Okay? We didn't have to write any CSS in order to accomplish that. Beyond that, let's imagine we want to create a multiple column layout down here. Let's start simple. Let's just have a 2-column layout, right? So 1 column, 2 column. So in our HTML, now you can set up a column layout outside of a container, but in this case, I do want my column layout to be constrained to that sort of container width. So I'm going to set this up inside the container, so maybe after the A element, we want to create a div, so div dot, with a class of row. So div.row, hit tab. Now inside this div, we just create one div for each column. So if I want two columns, I say div.col is short for column. Right after that, let's have a second column. So div.col again, hit tab. Now we need to add a bit of sample content inside each one so we can actually see them. So inside this first column div, let's say maybe heading level 3, feature number 1, and then maybe just a paragraph with a bit of sample text. So you can hit lorem and then tab to get a bit of placeholder lorem ipsum, and just do the same thing inside this second column. So h3, feature number 2, paragraph with a little bit of placeholder text, give it a save. Cool, that's all it took. We didn't write a single bit of CSS, and we have a 2-column layout. Okay, now notice that they're equal width. What if instead we wanted this column to take up 2/3 of the available width, and this one to only take up the final 1/3 of the available width? Well, Bootstrap uses a concept called the 12-column grid. So for example, imagine if there were these imaginary columns running down the page vertically like this, and imagine there were 12 of them, and they were all equal width. Now in that context of a 12-column grid, each one of these that are equal width, each one of these would be taking up 6/12 of the column grid. So if we wanted one of these to take up 2/3 of the available width, well, what's 2/3 of 12? It would be 8. So we want this column to take up 8/12 of the available width, and then we want this column to only take up the final remaining 4/12. So to do that, well, instead of just COL for column, we can say COL-8. We don't need to say the 12th part, it's just sort of assumed this means take up 8/12. And then on this one, we'd say COL-4. Give that a save, let's refresh. Cool, so you get the idea. You can experiment with different numbers. You just want it to add up to 12. Now on an unrelated note, I think it would look nice if there was a bit of vertical spacing in between our button and the beginning of this content. Now what I'm about to show you doesn't have anything to do with the 12-column grid system in Bootstrap. Instead, this is just sort of a universal or utility class, but if we want to add a bit of vertical spacing here, I would just find either that button, or we could even just find this row. And so I would want to add top margin to the row. Well, we can just give it another class. So right after row, just say space, and then MT, which stands for margin top, and then dash, and then you can choose any number between 1 and 5. So MT-1 will just give it a tiny bit of top margin. MT-5 will give it a rather large top margin. So if we save that, refresh, you get the idea. I think that's maybe too much of a gap, so instead I could try MT-4. Cool. In addition to MT for margin top, obviously there's margin left, margin right, and margin bottom with the obvious abbreviations that you would guess. There's also MX, which stands for margin horizontal, so that's left and right. There's MY, which is the vertical top and bottom. Also, there's P for padding, and then all of the other second letters apply, right? So padding top, padding left, padding right, padding vertical, padding horizontal. But we wanted just margin top -4. Okay, so it's just something I want you to keep in mind. It's a very useful class system to have. At this point, let's change gears and let's get back to the grid system, the 12-column grid. What I want to talk about now is how we can make this responsive to different screen sizes. So we learned how to set up a basic 2-column split like this, but now what if instead we wanted 4 columns on a relatively large desktop monitor, and then on a narrower screen, like maybe a tablet, we want just 2 columns per row. And then for a tiny smartphone, we just want a single column layout. Well, Bootstrap makes this very easy. So first though, let's make sure we have at least 4 divs that can act as the 4 columns. So back in our HTML, let's give ourselves a clean slate and let's get rid of the -8 on this column and get rid of the -4 on this column. And let's first just give ourselves 4 equal width columns. So to speed things up, I'm actually just going to copy and paste these existing 2 and then change the headline just so we can stay organized. So feature number 3 and feature number 4. Give that a save, reload. Okay, so we have our 4 columns. Now imagine on a large screen, this is what we want it to look like. But then on a screen that's narrow like this, we would want there to only be 2 columns per row. And then when you get down to a screen like this, or even if I zoom in, this should just be a single column layout. So check this out. Actually, instead of looking at it from the large screen first and then working our way down, let's take the modern approach of starting or beginning with mobile, right? Mobile first. So for a tiny screen, we don't want columns at all. We just want 1 column per row. But then maybe once the screen is about this wide, we want 2 columns per row. So instead of having COL at all, let's just say COL dash MD for medium dash 6, right? So that's half of the available width, 6/12. Let's go ahead and give this class to all 4 of our columns. I'm just going to copy and paste. Give that a save, refresh. Okay, so when the screen is very small like a phone, everything collapses to a nice single column layout. But once the screen is about this wide, you can see we switch to a 2 column layout. So that's what the MD or medium was referring to. Bootstrap considers this size of a screen width to be considered a medium screen. So the class means only for a medium screen and larger, then make it 6/12. Okay, and then when the screen gets even larger, we would want all 4 on a single row. So to achieve that, we can just give this a second class. So right after this, we can just say space, and now let's say call dash LG for large dash 3, right? What's 1/4 of 12? It's 3. So then you can just copy and paste this onto the other 4 columns. So just space and then paste, space, paste, space, paste. Give that a save, refresh. Now my screen is super small because I'm recording and I want the video to be clear on YouTube. But if I zoom out a bit to simulate a normal sized desktop or laptop screen, you can see now all 4 of them fit on a single row. So Bootstrap considers this screen size to be large. So our class name was saying only for a screen that is LG or this size or wider, only then make them take up 3/12 of the available width. And then if I resize down, there's 2 and there's a smartphone. So we just set up a responsive column layout and we did not have to write a single line of CSS code. We didn't have to write advanced CSS grid using min, max, and repeat, nor did we have to learn about media queries. So you can see that Bootstrap is incredibly useful. Now, once again, you might be wondering how I knew all of these magical class names. Well, from the official Bootstrap website, in the documentation, in the left-hand sidebar, you just look under Layout, and then there's a section named Grid. So if we click on that, this page has all of the information you could ever want about setting up different column layouts with Bootstrap. So below each example, it shows you the exact HTML that you would use. I'm a big fan of the documentation that Bootstrap provides. So you can go through here whenever you want to learn more about the grid system. And at this point, I want to make something abundantly clear that Bootstrap is not just a library full of button styles and column layouts. There's much more to Bootstrap than what we've covered here. However, there's no point in me walking through each feature of Bootstrap with you. Because the Bootstrap documentation is so excellent, I want you to go and experiment yourself. So go through their documentation, and in particular, I recommend checking out the components area. There's all sorts of cool stuff in here. Now, while I do want you to experiment and go through these on your own, there is something I want to point out to you to save you a lot of frustration. So for example, let's say I click on this one that's called Collapse. And I scroll down a bit, and I see this feature called Accordion Example. And I see there are these 3 sections, but only the first section has content that's visible. But if I click on the second one, it sort of slides down. And if I click on the third one, then it's visible. So maybe I really like this effect and I want to use it on my website. Now, just like with all the other Bootstrap documentation, below the example, you'll see HTML that you can use. And here I even see a copy button. So I can just copy that to my clipboard, back in VS Code. Maybe after the closing row div right here, I can just paste it in, give that a save, refresh my page. So here it is visually, but notice when I click on these other sections, nothing actually happens. And this is because this Bootstrap component in particular needs or relies on JavaScript. Now in this bootcamp series, we have not talked about JavaScript whatsoever yet. JavaScript is going to be our main topic in chapter number 2, which is the programming chapter. However, if you do want to experiment and have fun with Bootstrap, really quick, I want to show you how you can use the Bootstrap JavaScript, even though we don't know what JavaScript is yet. So all you need to do from the Bootstrap homepage, again, I'm using the version 5. When you're watching this, that might be the current version. But as of now, if you scroll down to the homepage, remember when we looked for Bootstrap CDN and we grabbed the CSS only? Right below that is where you can grab their JavaScript. So you would just click this button here to copy it to your clipboard. And then back in HTML, you don't want to include it where we included the CSS. JavaScript's a little bit different. Down at the very bottom of our HTML file, right before the closing body tag. So right here where my cursor is, right above the closing body tag, just paste in your clipboard. Okay, and this will load the Bootstrap JavaScript. So if I save this and refresh my page, now I can click, let me zoom out a little bit. Now I can click on these different areas to expand the particular content. Okay, now at this point, we have a general idea of what Bootstrap is, how to get started using it, and how to learn more, right? You just dig through the documentation and try experimenting with different components and features. Now, if it's this easy to start using Bootstrap, you might be wondering, what's the point of writing your own CSS? Why does anyone even bother learning CSS? Why doesn't everyone just use Bootstrap for everything? Well, that's a good question. I would say it depends on your career goals. Because while you certainly can use Bootstrap on many different types of projects, there are other types of projects and clients where Bootstrap is just out of the question. What I'm getting at is larger companies often have an established brand identity and they already have a style guideline, meaning they're very picky about the exact amount of spacing and margin and padding and the exact colors of border, the exact shadows, the exact everything, right? They're just super specific. And in situations like that, you're going to spend more time customizing and overriding Bootstrap values than you would just writing all of the CSS yourself. However, a lot of projects are not like that, and the client is not going to be that particular about the way things look. In that case, I think it makes perfect sense to use Bootstrap. Also, within the context of this bootcamp series, I think it makes a lot of sense to use Bootstrap. So here's what I recommend. Right now, we're bringing chapter 1 to a close, which is the design chapter. And in our very next video, we're going to start chapter number 2, which is programming. So for the remainder of this bootcamp series, I think it would make perfect sense for you to just use Bootstrap and not worry about CSS. This way, you can use all of your brain's horsepower on absorbing the new topics. Then, at the very end of this bootcamp series, if you are interested in design and the front end and the user interface, I absolutely recommend you stop using Bootstrap all of the time and actually go back and study CSS. Or if you don't ever want to use Bootstrap at all, that's totally fine too. That's your option. Now, before we bring this video to a close, I do want to say something in defense of CSS and sort of against using Bootstrap. So just this last week, I was talking to my friend. He's had all sorts of different jobs. He's been chief technology officer, and he was saying that they hire a lot of their developers from boot camps. And these developers they're hiring out of the boot camps, they're very skilled in a lot of different areas of programming. However, when it comes time to actually implement a new custom design component in the application, a lot of them struggle. Because if something isn't just copy and pastable from Bootstrap or from a material design pre-existing component, well, a lot of these developers sort of fall apart. They never actually built their CSS skills. I know I've seen this in my work. There might be a developer who's super skilled when it comes to databases and servers, But if you ask them to implement a custom design that isn't just straight out of Bootstrap, they fall apart. And there's nothing wrong with that. We all have our own different strengths and weaknesses. So it's up to you to figure out what you're interested in. But I just want to say that it's very common for a lot of people to not be interested in CSS and they just want to learn programming because they think that's where the most lucrative jobs are, or that's where the most job opportunities overall are. I'm not going to confirm or deny that, but I will say this. Every great development team needs at least one CSS superhero. There's just no way around that. Now, big picture, this doesn't really change anything because my career advice still stands, and that is follow your interests. Study whatever interests you the most and whatever seems like the most fun. If that's CSS, great. If it's not, just use Bootstrap like 99% of everyone else and leave the design to the CSS superheroes. That's the great thing about this industry. Everyone has their own strengths and weaknesses and superpowers, and that's the whole reason development teams exist, and it's not just one person creating everything. We come together as development teams so that way we cover all of the different bases and we have all of the strength necessary. Anyways, this is going to bring the design chapter to a close. In our very next video, we're going to begin the programming chapter. I know this is what many of you have been looking forward to this entire time. I think it's going to be a ton of fun because programming is really when you start to learn how to think in terms of code. And it's not just about how things look visually. Anyways, thanks for working through this first chapter with me. And if you have any friends or family that might be interested in this programming chapter, I'd appreciate it if you could share this link. In a lot of ways, we're really just now getting started. So let's keep our momentum rolling, and I'll see you in the next one.